"Don't touch her!" the maid screamed. The Alpha King obeyed without question. The sky above the kingdom of Ashen Vale was a black sea, heavy with rolling clouds and lashing rain. Lightning split the air, illuminating the jagged towers of the royal castle, and thunder rolled like the roar of ancient beasts. Inside those walls, power spoke through every stone, every corridor, and every shadow. The Alpha King, Kale, moved through the halls like a storm made flesh. His presence alone demanded attention, respect, and fear. Yet tonight, something was different. The castle, which had been home to his dominion for decades, seemed unsettled. Whispers of a stranger had reached him days ago, carried on trembling voices. A maiden had arrived, brought by a desperate village at the edge of the kingdom. Raj. She was said to carry a curse, a force that no mortal could touch without consequence. No soldier, no guard, dared claim to understand the danger she carried. And now, as Kale approached the grand hall, a scream shattered the hum of rain and wind. "Don't touch her!" The voice was small, yet it struck Kale like a bell tolling in a deep cavern. "Desk." He halted. The words came from a maid, her hands trembling, eyes wide with raw fear and determination. She was standing over a young woman who had been brought forward in chains, yet somehow still radiated an aura of fragile strength. Kale's dark eyes, sharp as the edge of a sword, studied the scene. "The maiden at the center!" Lyra lifted her gaze slowly. Her eyes were the color of storm clouds, shifting between gray and a faint silver. She did not speak, nor did she move, yet Kale felt an unusual pull, as if the air around her carried weight he could not ignore. He was the Alpha King. None had ever stopped him before. And yet, he obeyed the maid. He did not step closer. He did not reach for her. Instead, he let the silence hang, heavy and electric. The maid stepped back, her chest heaving. She whispered something Kale barely heard. She is not safe if anyone touches her. Not even you." Raven's lips pressed into a thin line. He had ruled this kingdom with an iron hand, and yet the simple plea of a maid, fear-laden and honest, made him pause. That pause was not weakness, it was curiosity. Something about Lyra's stillness, her silent strength, tugged at a corner of his soul, long untouched. He studied her. The chains on her wrists gleamed faintly, etched with symbols no living scholar had ever seen. Her hair, dark as midnight, clung to her wet face from the storm outside. There was beauty in her fragility, yes, but also an unyielding core that whispered danger and power all at once. Kale had been a man of command for years, teaching obedience through fear and respect. Yet tonight, obedience was not enough. The pull toward her was not lust, nor simple intrigue. It was the undeniable tug of fate. And Lyra? She met his gaze with a quiet intensity that both unnerved and fascinated him. She did not fear him, not fully. She feared what was hidden inside her, a shadow she could not yet name. And Kale, for the first time in decades, felt the stirrings of something unfamiliar. Longing, restraint, and the whisper of respect mingled with curiosity. The hall grew quiet again, broken only by the tapping of rain against the tall windows. The guards who had escorted her looked to Kale, uncertain, anxious. He raised a hand, and the room's stillness responded as if obeying an unseen command. "Leave her," Kale said finally, his voice low, steady, and filled with unshakable authority. "She is not to be harmed." The maid's lips trembled as she nodded. Relief softened her features, and for a moment Kale allowed himself to notice the loyalty and courage in her small frame. Alone, Kale turned toward the long corridor that led to his private chambers. But the pull of Lyra's presence followed him, invisible yet undeniable. He felt it in the hush of the castle, in the echo of her chains, in the lingering glance she had given him before she was led away. That night the storm raged with renewed fury. Cale stood at the high window of his chamber, looking out over the kingdom he had ruled for so long. He should have felt triumph, the satisfaction of control. But instead, he felt unease. The storm mirrored his inner turbulence. He did not sleep. He thought of Lyra. He thought of the quiet power she had carried, even in chains. He thought of the words of the Maid, so simple and yet so dangerous. Do not touch her. The next morning, Cale found Lyra alone in the garden. The castle gardeners had dared to place her there under watch, yet she moved with a grace that defied the weight of her chains. She did not speak, yet every motion she made seemed purposeful, as if she was drawing invisible patterns in the air. Cale watched from the stone balcony above. He had the right to command her, to bring her to his chamber, to study her powers. But something restrained him. It was no longer merely the warning of the Maid. It was something deeper, an instinct that whispered danger and destiny. Lyra sensed him. She looked up at the balcony, and for a fleeting moment, her eyes softened, not in fear, but in recognition. It was a look that spoke of shared solitude, of loneliness mirrored across the void of experience. Cale's heart, long hardened by the burdens of kingship, felt the tug of something he had not allowed himself in decades: connection. But their fragile bond was tested almost immediately. A shadow moved along the edges of the garden, barely noticeable yet filled with menace. Lyra stiffened, chains rattling softly, and Cale felt an unnatural chill crawl up his spine. The shadow seemed to hesitate when it reached her, as if it recognized the invisible barrier that surrounded her. He knew then she was not just a prisoner. She was a guardian of a secret, and that secret could destroy the kingdom or save it. Cale descended into the garden, silent and deliberate. Each step was measured, controlled, as if testing the laws of some invisible dance. Lyra did not flee. She did not bow. She simply met his gaze, calm but wary, her chest rising and falling with restrained emotion. "Who are you?" Cale demanded, his voice firm but softer than usual, curious rather than commanding. Lyra's lips parted slightly, yet no words came. Instead, she held his gaze, as if daring him to see her fully. Cale realized in that instant that she knew much more than she revealed, and that knowledge made her dangerous. Not dangerous in a way that could be measured by sword or shield, but dangerous in a way that could unravel him, his control, and perhaps the very kingdom he had built. He did not reach for her. He did not force the connection. He simply observed, letting the space between them speak. A maid approached silently from behind Lyra, eyes wide. She whispered to Cale, "Do not underestimate her, my king. Breathe. She is not like any other human." Kyle's jaw tightened. That was all he needed. The line between fascination and obsession blurred. And though he was the Alpha King, used to taking what he wanted, he understood something crucial in that moment. Some powers were not to be commanded. They were to be respected, feared, and understood. As dusk fell, casting the garden in shades of silver and black, Cale returned to his chamber. But the image of Lyra lingered in his mind like a haunting melody. He replayed the moment her eyes met his, the subtle strength in her stance, and the quiet defiance that no command could break. Outside, the storm had settled, leaving only the whisper of wind through the trees. But inside Cale, a new storm brewed, a storm of curiosity, desire for understanding, and the dangerous thrill of something beyond control. That night, Lyra's chains rattled in her cell. She was awake, eyes wide and restless, sensing his thoughts even from afar. She did not fear him, yet she recognized in him a force she could neither trust nor resist. And in that recognition, a silent understanding formed. Their fates were now intertwined. And so in the quiet of the castle the storm between two souls began, a storm neither wind nor rain could touch. The Alpha King, used to bending the world to his will, felt the first tremor of humility. The maiden, cursed and mysterious, understood the weight of the power she carried. Neither knew what would come next. But the air was thick with the promise of danger, longing, and a story that could change everything. Because in Ashen Vale, destiny was never gentle, and when the Alpha King obeyed a maid's warning, even for a moment, the world shifted on its axis. And somewhere in the shadows, unseen and silent, the forces that had cursed Lyra stirred, sensing that the game had begun. The castle of Ashen Vale was silent under the silver light of a waning moon. Rain had passed, leaving the stone walls slick and gleaming, and the gardens glistened with drops that caught the faint light like scattered stars. Yet the silence did not bring peace. It hummed with tension, unspoken fears, and the soft stirrings of power that had begun to awaken within Lyra. Cale walked the corridors, silent and deliberate, as if the shadows themselves parted for him. He had spent the day observing her from a distance, careful to respect the boundaries the maid had enforced. But curiosity burned within him. She was unlike any being he had encountered. Fragile in appearance, yet radiating strength, mysterious yet entirely present. Lyra, meanwhile, moved through her small, sparsely furnished chamber. The chains that had held her were now removed, though a trace of their weight lingered in her wrists. She had been given a quiet corner of the castle to reside in, a gesture of both caution and respect. She had not yet trusted anyone, not even the Alpha King, but she observed him as he moved through the castle, noting the subtle power in his presence and the restraint he showed in dealing with her. It was the balance between power and restraint that intrigued her most. He could have claimed her, commanded her, bent her to his will in moments. Yet he had not. That alone told her something about him. A depth beneath the alpha mask, a layer few had the courage to see. Cale returned to the garden that evening, drawn by instinct rather than reason. The moonlight fell over the hedges and fountains, casting long, trembling shadows. Lyra was there, standing beneath an archway of black ivy, her form elegant and still. She did not flinch at his approach, nor did she speak. She simply let him watch, as if daring him to see what lay beyond her surface. Steps carefully, keeping his movements deliberate and calm. "Why do you not fear me?" he asked, his voice low, carrying over the soft rustle of leaves. Lyra's eyes, reflective like storm clouds, met his. "Fear is for those who do not understand what follows," she said softly. "I do not fear you. I fear the shadows that follow me. And you must learn to tread carefully, even you." Cale's dark brows furrowed. The warning was quiet but powerful, carrying authority and truth. She was no ordinary captive. She was something else entirely, a force tempered by caution and strength, a presence that could not be bent by even a king. "Then tell me," Cale said, taking a measured step closer. "Tell me what you carry, Lyra." "I do not command you. I only wish to understand." Lyra's lips twitched, almost forming a smile, though her eyes remained guarded. "Some truths are not for kings," she whispered. "And some dangers are not meant to be faced with commands." Cale studied her carefully. He felt the tension coiled beneath her calm exterior, sensed the magic and the shadows lurking just beyond her gaze. And yet he did not retreat. His instincts, honed by years of ruling, told him to be cautious, to hold his power in check. And for the first time in decades he understood restraint, not as weakness, but as respect. That night, a soft wind carried whispers through the corridors of the castle. Servants spoke in hushed tones of shadows moving where no light fell. of strange occurrences and flickering forms that vanished when approached. The Alpha King felt the stirrings of unease, a premonition that the danger Lyra carried was awakening, reaching beyond the limits of mortal understanding. Lyra felt it too. The shadows that clung to her began to stir, subtle at first, a shiver along her spine, a whisper of movement in the corner of her vision. She did not speak of it, not yet, but her pulse quickened, and her eyes darted to Cale more than once, seeking reassurance or perhaps warning. Over the next days, Kyle allowed her small freedoms. He had her brought to the garden under watch, where she could move, stretch, and breathe in the moonlight, silently from the balcony, fascinated by the grace with which she moved. Her presence seemed to quiet the wind, calm the trees, and yet stir something darker beneath the surface. The castle magician, an old man named Eldrick, approached Cale one evening in the private library. His robes rustled like dry leaves as he spoke. "Majesty," he said, "the girl carries a shadow older than this kingdom. It is bound to her, yet it is not hers alone. To touch her, breaths, is to awaken a power that even kings cannot tame." He had already felt it, her aura, the subtle tension that ran through the stone halls when she moved. "And yet I feel." He paused, searching for words. "I feel that she is more than her curse. She is whole, despite the shadow, vast, strong, despite the danger." Eldrick studied him quietly. "Strength can blind even the wisest king. Beware what binds her, for it may bind you as well." Back. That night Cale could not sleep. He returned to the garden under the pale light of the moon, and there she was again, silent and still. The air between them hummed, electric with unspoken words, shared solitude, and the faint stirrings of connection neither fully understood. Lyra sensed his presence even before he spoke. "You do not fear me," she said again, her voice calm, steady, and strangely melodic. "And yet, you should." Cale's dark eyes softened, yet his voice remained steady. "I do not fear what I can see. I fear only what I cannot." "And what I do not understand." A silence fell, long and deliberate. In that silence, a subtle understanding formed, unspoken yet undeniable. They were two forces, drawn together by curiosity, respect, and the weight of destinies neither had chosen. The next day brought a challenge. A shadow, darker than the night, moved through the corridors of the castle. It was subtle at first, slipping along walls, shifting in corners where the eyes of guards could not reach. But Lyra felt it instantly, and her chains rattled with a soft, urgent warning. Cale, sensing her tension, followed silently, his instincts as a king and a protector alert. The shadow halted near the main hall, pausing as if aware of their presence. Lyra stepped forward, her chains now removed, and the air seemed to hum around her. The shadow recoiled, but it did not flee entirely. Cale watched, careful not to intervene, yet ready to act. He had commanded armies, defeated enemies, and quelled rebellions. But this was different. This was not about power. This was about trust, balance, and understanding forces beyond human comprehension. Lyra's eyes flicked to him, and in that glance Cale understood something essential. She could not face this alone, and neither could he. The dance of power between them had begun, subtle yet unyielding, a bond forged in caution, respect, and the faint stirrings of something deeper. The shadow hissed softly, a sound that was neither human nor animal, and Cale felt the hair on his arms rise. Desk. He stepped forward instinctively, but Lyra placed a hand subtly on his arm. A quiet gesture, neither command nor surrender. It was a request for partnership, trust, and acknowledgement. Together they faced the shadow. Lyra moved first, her presence glowing faintly, chains of energy forming briefly around her wrists. The shadow recoiled, as if recognizing the strength in her control. Cale stood close, alert, ready to protect, yet careful not to dominate. The encounter ended as quickly as it began. The shadow vanished into the walls, leaving only a faint chill in the air and the soft rustle of leaves from the garden. Cale turned to Lyra. For a moment, words failed both of them. They were silent, yet the understanding between them had deepened. "You are remarkable," Cale said finally, voice low, tinged with awe. "And dangerous." Lyra's lips twitched in the faintest of smiles. "I am what I must be," she said. "And you?" "You are not like the others. You see me without fear." Cale's dark eyes met hers fully. "I see you," he said simply. And in that simple declaration, an unspoken bond was forged, a bond of trust, caution, and mutual recognition of power and vulnerability. But the calm was fleeting. In the quiet of the castle that night, unseen eyes watched from the shadows. Forces older than the kingdom, older than the mountains themselves, had taken notice. The stirrings of Lyra's power, restrained though they were, had awakened something ancient and restless. Lyra felt it even in her sleep, a shiver along her spine, the echo of whispers that no human mouth could speak. She awoke suddenly, heart racing, and sensed Cale outside her door, silent and watchful as always. "Day." "Cale," she whispered, voice barely audible. "Something comes."
"I can feel it." Call's jaw tightened. He did not speak immediately.
Instead, he let the silence stretch, listening to the subtle hum of the castle, the faint stir of magic in the air, and the pulse of danger that had begun to weave itself around them both. Finally, he said, "Then we face it together. I do not command you. I do not claim you. But I will not let it touch you alone." Lyra met his gaze, a mixture of relief, trust, and a flicker of something more, something neither fear nor caution could fully define. In that moment, the boundaries between them shifted. They were no longer merely king and captive. They were allies in a world of shadows, bound by respect and drawn together by forces that neither could resist. Outside, the wind whispered through the castle, carrying the faintest echo of a warning. The shadow that had stirred in the corridors was only the beginning. Forces beyond understanding were awakening, and the bond between Lyra and Cale would be tested as never before. But for now, in the quiet of the moonlit garden, they stood side by side. A king who had learned restraint, and a maiden who had begun to trust. The tension between them was electric, unspoken, and growing, hinting at dangers, desires, and destinies yet to unfold. The kingdom of Ashen Vale had changed. Where once the streets were orderly and the castle gleamed like polished stone, now shadows lingered in every corner. Mist crawled along the cobblestones, thick and damp, twisting around the gates and towers. Crops withered in the fields, and the river that fed the city ran sluggish, dark, and cold. Whispers of a curse spread through every village, murmured in fear by farmers, merchants, and children alike. Even the guards, once stalwart and confident, hesitated at their posts. Cale stood in the high hall, dark robes falling around his broad shoulders, his jaw tight and eyes sharp. He had been awake for hours, poring over maps, reports, and counsel from Eldrick, the old castle magician. All spoke of the same threat. The shadow that followed Lyra was growing stronger, reaching beyond the boundaries of the castle, the city, and even the kingdom itself. Yet Cale's mind, though burdened by duty, was never far from Lyra. She had become the center of his thoughts, the quiet storm in his heart he could not resist nor fully understand. Each day he watched her, aware of her power, her courage, and the hidden sorrow she carried. And though she had begun to trust him, she remained a mystery, as fragile and strong as glass in storm winds. Lyra herself felt the stirrings of power more keenly now. The shadow that had lurked in the castle corridors no longer lingered at the edges. It pressed close, whispering in voices she could barely hear. It called to her fear, to the guilt and memories she had tried to bury. She had tried to control it, to hide it, but each day it grew stronger, feeding on the unrest in the kingdom, on Kale's distant worries, and on her own doubts. One evening, as the sky turned a deep violet with the coming of night, Lyra was walking through the castle gardens when she sensed something near. A presence unlike Kael's, dark and deliberate, slipped between the shadows of the hedges. Her heart stilled, and instinctively she readied herself. Kael emerged silently from the balcony above, watching her with concern. "Do you feel it?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Lyra nodded, eyes narrowing. "Yes. It grows stronger."
"I think someone or something wants me, or perhaps wants the power I carry."
"We must be careful." Kael's hand brushed the hilt of his sword. "Then we prepare together." That night the castle was shaken by betrayal. A trusted advisor, Sir Malric, who had served the Alpha King loyally for decades, revealed his true intentions. He had learned of Lyra's powers, and he coveted them, not for the kingdom, but for himself. By taking her, he could control the shadows and command the fate of Ashen Vale. Kael discovered the plot just in time, but not before Malric had attempted to abduct Lyra. The confrontation erupted in the northern tower, where lightning flashed through broken windows and wind howled like a wounded beast. Kael arrived just as Malric cornered her, but the sight of her chained in fear stirred a strange burning rage in him, a rage he had not felt for years. "Let her go," Kael commanded, his voice a low thunderclap, carrying authority beyond mortal limits.
Malric sneered. "You cannot control this, Kael."
"You are a king, yes, but she is beyond even your grasp." Lyra stepped forward, chains rattling softly, and for the first time she did not hide. A faint light shimmered around her, not bright, but steady. She raised her hands, and the shadow that had stalked her the past week surged outward, pushing Malric back. The guards froze, unsure whether to flee or obey. Kael moved swiftly, drawing his sword but not to strike her. He positioned himself between her and Malric, ready to defend her with his life. In that moment the bond between them became undeniable. Not desire, not ownership, but trust forged under threat, a recognition of mutual strength. Malric lunged, desperate, and Kael met him head-on. The clash was brief, but fierce. Sparks flew as steel met steel, and Malric's ambition collided with Kael's unwavering determination. In the end, Kael disarmed him, the Alpha's power overwhelming the traitor's greed. Malric fell to his knees, defeated, yet alive. Kael had not killed him. That decision, though deliberate, carried weight. Mercy was part of power, but he knew it could not be given freely in all matters. After the confrontation, Kael turned to Lyra. She looked at him, eyes wide but steady, as if measuring his soul. She had never expected a king to fight beside her, to respect her control, and yet here he was, not a ruler above her, but a partner beside her in the storm. "You are stronger than I imagined," Kael said, voice soft but firm. Lyra shook her head. "I am only as strong as I must be. The shadow. It is not defeated yet." Malric was a test, a small piece of the danger. There is more to come. And indeed, she was right. That very night, a larger, darker presence moved through the castle. Kael sensed it immediately, a chill that made the air heavy and thick. It was a force older than any living soul, a shadow that did not merely linger. It sought Lyra, and through her, it sought him. The Alpha King did not hesitate to be. He gathered a small circle of loyal guards and prepared to follow the signs of disturbance. Lyra accompanied him, moving with quiet grace and purpose, her power faintly glowing, guiding them. Back. Together they descended into the shadowed halls of the castle, where darkness pressed close and fear whispered in every corner. It was there, in the hidden tunnels beneath the castle, that the first true sacrifice was demanded. A loyal servant, one who had guided Lyra safely through the gardens and chambers, stepped forward to shield her from the shadow. In a blink, the shadow struck, consuming him in darkness that left only silence and the echo of his courage. Lyra cried out, and Cale's hand brushed hers, steadying her, sharing in her pain, absorbing it as if to lessen the weight. "Do not falter," he said, voice firm, though inside his heart ached at the loss. "We face this together." Lyra nodded, tears glinting in her eyes, and together they pressed onward. The shadow's presence thickened, curling around them like smoke, whispering secrets and lies. Lyra's power flared, pushing it back, but it adapted, shifting, finding cracks in her control. Cale fought alongside her, striking at the tendrils of darkness, his sword slicing through shadow, his will unwavering. Hours passed in tense struggle. Exhaustion weighed on both, but neither faltered. And in the darkest chamber beneath the castle, they found it, the source of the shadow's current surge, an ancient relic, pulsing with malevolent energy, tethered to Lyra's curse. It was a thing of old stone and black veins, older than Ashen Vale itself, inscribed with runes that glowed faintly in the dark. Lyra stepped forward, understanding immediately. "It feeds on me and through me, on the kingdom," she said, voice trembling but clear. "If I do not confront it, all of Ashen Vale will fall." "Then we do it together. You do not face this alone." The ritual to contain the shadow was painful and demanding. Lyra channeled her power, binding the relic's darkness to her own will. Each pulse of energy sent shockwaves through her body, and each wave tested Cale's patience and strength. He stayed close, offering calm and stability, his presence grounding her as the dark force surged.
At one point, Lyra faltered, weakened by the intensity of the shadow.
Cale caught her, holding her firmly yet gently, their faces inches apart. In that moment their bond deepened beyond words, beyond trust, into something elemental, a recognition that they were stronger together even in the face of forces older than kingdoms. With one final surge of power, Lyra contained the shadow, binding it to the relic. Sealing it away for now, she collapsed into Cale's arms, exhausted but alive. Cale held her, silent, letting her strength mingle with his own, acknowledging the sacrifices they had both made. But the relief was fleeting. Outside, the wind carried a new sound, a faint, chilling laughter, low and deliberate, echoing through the corridors of the castle. It was not Malric, nor the shadow they had just contained. It was something else, something patient, ancient, and relentless. Cale looked down at Lyra, feeling her trembling against him, and whispered, "We have survived this night, but the dawn may bring greater danger. Be ready, Lyra." "I will," met his gaze exhausted, but resolute. "For us, for the kingdom, and for you." Together they stood in the darkness of the hidden chamber, knowing that though they had fought and survived, the true test of their bond and of Ashen Vale was only beginning. The shadow that had tested them was but a fragment of what awaited. The dawn over Ashen Vale was not gentle. The sky bled shades of crimson and gray, as if the heavens themselves mourned the kingdom's unrest. Smoke rose from distant villages where fire had claimed what fear and darkness could not. The river, sluggish and darkened from days of storms, reflected the turmoil like a mirror of despair. Ashen Vale trembled on the edge of ruin. Cale stood atop the highest tower of the castle, his cloak whipping in the wind. His dark eyes scanned the horizon, sharp and unyielding, but shadowed with worry. The events of the past days weighed upon him. Not only the rebellion of Malric and the shadows they had contained, but the sense that something far older, far more cunning was awakening. Beside him, Lyra moved with quiet grace. Her hands trembled slightly from the exertion of containing the shadow beneath the castle, but her gaze was steady, fierce, and unyielding. She had grown stronger in ways neither she nor Cale could have imagined, yet the weight of the unseen enemy pressed on her. Cale turned to her.
Are you ready?
He asked, voice low, carrying authority but also care. Lyra nodded, eyes reflecting the stormy skies above. I have no choice. The shadow does not wait for readiness. It feeds on fear, hesitation, weakness. Together they descended into the lower halls of the castle, where the ancient relic still pulsed faintly, bound by Lyra's will. But the energy emanating from it was no longer contained. The shadow stirred, sensing its tether, whispering in voices older than time, taunting, probing, demanding release. The ground trembled beneath their feet as they approached the chamber where the relic lay. Cale drew his sword, the steel gleaming in the dim light, though this time it was not only for battle, it was a symbol of protection, of unwavering presence. Lyra's hands glowed faintly, energy swirling around her, delicate yet potent, as she prepared to confront the true source of the darkness. From the shadows, a figure emerged. Not Maloric, not a mortal enemy, but a being of darkness itself. Its form was fluid, shifting between shapes, sometimes human, sometimes beast, sometimes nothing at all. Its voice was everywhere, yet nowhere, carrying a power that made the walls of the castle hum. "You cannot stop me," it whispered. 1,000 echoes intertwining into one. "She is mine, and you are too late, Alpha King." Cale stepped forward, placing himself slightly before Lyra.
You are wrong, he said, voice steady, unwavering. Neither of you belong to anyone. We face you together. Lyra felt his presence beside her like a shield.
Though their bond was still new, it had been forged in fire, trust, and mutual respect. She no longer fought alone. She had learned to trust, and she had learned to fight alongside someone who did not seek to dominate her, but to stand with her. The shadow lunged. Its form expanded, tendrils of darkness whipping through the chamber. Cale swung his sword, cutting through the nearest tendrils, his strength and skill honed over years of command. But the shadow adapted, shifting, curling, probing for weaknesses. Lyra closed her eyes, drawing deep into herself. She remembered the words of the Maid, the first warning, "Do not touch her." She realized now the deeper meaning. The shadow fed on intrusion, on force against her will. By balance could it be overcome. She allowed herself to merge her power with Cale's presence, the two of them becoming a single force. Energy surged around them, and the chamber was filled with light and darkness intertwined. Lyra called to the shadow, not with anger, but with understanding. "I do not reject you," she said. "I do not fear you. But you will not control me, or this kingdom." The shadow screamed, a sound that shook the very stone. It thrashed, trying to escape the bonds of her will, but Cale's presence was steady, firm, a grounding force that allowed her to channel the power without losing herself. Together they wove a circle of energy, a balance between light and dark, strength and restraint, king and maiden, alpha and equal.
Minutes stretched like hours.
Cale fought beside her, striking at shadows that threatened to break their circle, while Lyra poured her energy into containment, her fear transformed into courage, and then, in a final crescendo of light and sound, the shadow faltered. Lyra stepped forward, energy converging in her hands, and bound the darkness to the relic with a force stronger than before. The chamber trembled one last time, and the shadow screamed into nothingness, leaving only silence and the faint glow of the contained relic. Cale let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. He turned to Lyra, finding her trembling, exhausted, but alive. For the first time in days, he saw her smile. Not forced, not cautious, but real.
"You did it," he said, voice low and full of admiration.
"You faced it, and you did not falter." Lyra shook her head, breathless. "We did it," she said. "Together. Alone. I would have failed. But with you, I found the courage I did not know I had. Kael reached for her hands, holding them firmly, yet gently. But I found strength I had long forgotten. Strength that comes not from command, but from trust. The kingdom outside was still scarred, the fires and smoke a reminder of the trials they had endured. But within the castle, within the bond they had forged, a new dawn was rising. One born not of conquest or control, but of partnership, respect, and the recognition of shared humanity and power. In the days that followed, Kael and Lyra worked to restore the kingdom. Villages were rebuilt, the river purified by ancient rites, and the people slowly returned to their lives, wary but hopeful. Kael ruled not only with authority, but with compassion tempered by the understanding he had gained through his bond with Lyra. And Lyra, once a prisoner of a curse and fear, became a guiding presence for the people, her power no longer hidden but respected and balanced. Yet the most profound change was not in the kingdom, it was in them. Kael no longer carried the cold weight of solitude. Lyra no longer carried the heavy burden of a secret she could face alone. They had found in each other a balance neither had expected, a partnership that transcended fear, power, and destiny. One evening, as the sun set behind the distant mountains, casting the sky in shades of gold and violet, Kael and Lyra stood on the balcony overlooking the kingdom. The wind carried the scent of blooming flowers. The rivers sang their steady song. And for the first time in weeks, the world felt at peace. Kael looked at Lyra, his eyes softening. "You are mine," he said, not in command, but in acknowledgement. Not to own, not to control, but to stand beside. Always. Lyra's lips curved into a gentle smile. "And you are mine," she whispered, voice steady and sure. "To follow into darkness, to rise into light, and to face whatever comes, together." No words could fully capture the bond they had forged, the trials they had endured, or the understanding that their fates were intertwined. But the gesture alone was enough. Above them the stars began to shine, piercing the remnants of the storm clouds. The relic, contained and still, pulsed softly in the hidden chamber below, a reminder that darkness existed, but that it could be met with courage, trust, and unity. Kael and Lyra stood together on the balcony, the wind weaving through their hair, their hearts beating in quiet harmony. Ashen Vale was scarred, yes, but alive. And so were they. Their bond, tested in fire and shadow, had endured. And for the first time, the future, uncertain though it remained, seemed possible. The storm had passed, but the memory of it lingered, shaping the people, the kingdom, and the bond between king and maiden. They had faced the darkness, they had risked everything, and they had emerged transformed, not broken, not dominated, but tempered and united. Kael turned to Lyra, eyes glinting with resolve and warmth. "Whatever comes next," he said, "we face it as one." Lyra's hand tightened over his. "Always," she said. And in that single word, unspoken histories and whispered fears were sealed away, replaced by trust, partnership, and love forged in shadow and fire, a bond unbreakable. And a story not of control or fear, but of redemption, courage, and the eternal oath they had sworn to each other. One that would endure beyond shadow, beyond time, and beyond even the storms that life would bring.